Welcome to the Lebanon Ideas Forum series, featuring politicians, economists, activists, and members of the diaspora from Lebanon to discuss the current domestic, political, and economic developments, as well as relations with the United States and the impact of the region's geopolitics on the country. Today, we zoom into Lebanon's gas exploration, a timely topic as the US brokered maritime deal between Lebanon and Israel is underway and is set to be signed in a few days. A historic agreement that deserves a closer look to better understand the economic benefits for Lebanon. And to help us unpack this is our guest today, Alain Bifani, an economist who served as Director General of the Lebanon Ministry of Finance from 2000 until 2020, and is currently the president of the Lebanon Citizen Foundation, which aims to promote efficient and relevant public policy options for Lebanon. Alain, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marissa. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
So I think, given your expertise on Lebanon's economy, I want to kick this off with just your current assessment of Lebanon's economy today, before we go into the latest publication of the Lebanon Citizen Foundation on Lebanon's gas exploration. So how would you describe the state of Lebanon's economy today?
Pretty much in a free fall. The reality of the Lebanese economy is that it was left on purpose in a free fall by the governing elite in Lebanon. And there's a good reason for that. It is that any reform is going basically against what they managed to secure for themselves as revenues from public assets and the state. And therefore, they are, of course, blocking any kind of reforms. And they have sabotaged also the IMF deal that the previous government and that myself basically worked a lot on when we produced the restructuring and rescue plan for Lebanon, which was about, of course, the monetary situation, the restructuring of the debt, of the banks, of the central bank, the safety nets, and public finance. Given this situation where you have, in fact, a ruling group that cannot afford, for its own sake, to have the proper reforms for its own country, then the result of that is that you sit and watch your country fall apart. Basically, today, there is no such thing as an economy in Lebanon. There are no banks. The banks are zombie banks. In reality, they are all bankrupt, but the central bank doesn't want to admit it, and it is not announced. And for as long as it is not announced, there is no replacement. There are no new institutions that are doing the job. There is no split between good banks, bad banks. And the remaining institutions have basically taken and lost most of the deposits that were deposited in the banking system in Lebanon. And you can imagine the hardship on the Lebanese population because of that. Mm-hmm. But they're managing to continue along this path. Of course, the consequences are that the government is unable to do anything that makes sense. So no public services are still rendered properly. We have cholera today in Lebanon due to the inability of the government to act and provide the minimum basic services. There is no electricity. All of the electricity that is being used comes from private generators or new renewable systems. And everything else is on hold. So, of course, the ruling elite would always find a good reason why they have to wait. They would tell you, well, now we have to stop thinking about anything and talk about the presidential election only. but even the presidential election is not taking place. And then they will tell you, no need for an IMF deal. What matters is that we're going to have the gas, we're going to have the money. But in the past, we had lots of billions, and we saw exactly where all of this led us, given the poor governance of the system. So without going into all of the details, the situation today is a complete tragedy. And there is an immediate need for a system that works, an immediate need for governance that can go beyond the corrupt system that has been in place for a long time, and of course, the implementation of the long-awaited reforms that we all know about.
Absolutely. And of course, this is all impacting the Lebanese citizen with rising food prices, rising energy prices. And this gets us into what you are trying to do with the Lebanon Citizen Foundation, focus on policies that will work to get things going, on solutions. So today, given that you just published a few months ago the assessment on Lebanon's gas exploration and exploitation, I guess to the average person who doesn't understand the technicalities of, well, how does this work and what are the economic benefits for Lebanon on the cusp of the signing of this deal, this historic deal between Israel and Lebanon that the United States brokered. Can you explain to us, first of all, what is the status of Lebanon's reserves, and then how do you go about it, and what are the benefits for the country?
Sure, thank you for asking. Actually, the study that we prepared was not about whether this is a good or a bad thing, whether we have a lot of gas or little gas. What really stood behind that is that we wanted to imagine that we had a quote-unquote normal government. What would a normal government with a challenge of potentially finding gas in the offshore do? How would it, in an optimal manner, manage this situation? So we started by looking at what the reserves could be. Of course, we're not saying that the figures that we're giving are the correct ones. No one has the correct ones for the time being. For the time being, the exploration hasn't even started. There was one trial by the consortium led by Total that didn't find a reservoir. They found a tiny amount of gas, but no reservoir. And so all we can say is that given the geography of the waters, given what we saw already at neighbors in the neighboring regions, and given some studies that were made, one by the US Geological Survey, others by the Lebanese Petroleum, well, the company that is managing, it's called the LPA. We think, and we have contradicting figures, that the reserves in Lebanon are anywhere between 340 and 708 billion cubic meters in the offshore. Is this necessarily a correct figure? Not at all. Another assessment by more or less the same players says that the most promising blocks, which are block 1, 4, and 9, have the first one about 422 billion cubic meters, the second one, if I remember well, 368, and the last one, 430. So this puts us at a slightly higher level of reserves. But what does that mean? Let's assume that Lebanon finds gas and is thinking about the best ways to exploit that. First, one has to be able to assess the costs of extraction, of infrastructure, of maintenance, of operations, which is what we did. From that, we extract, once again, by comparing to other fields in the region, Zohr, Tamar, Karish, Leviathan, and the fields in Cyprus, we come up with a possible price for the gas, for the Lebanese gas.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have that, we also assess the needs locally. How much do we need to make sure that we have enough energy? Let's assume that we work, and this is what we assume, that we had 50% of our energy generated out of gas. And what is the remaining part that can be exported? What are the shares of Lebanon? What are the shares of the companies?
Mm-hmm.
And then, fine, we have gas for exportation. This is great, but where do we sell that? So what are the normal markets? If, for instance, we want to sell gas to Jordan, then what would be the cost of the proper infrastructure for that? If we want to sell to the European Union, to Turkey, to Egypt, of course, one will tell me immediately Egypt has a lot of gas. True. Despite all of the gas they have, in a few years' time, they're going to become, again, net importers of gas. So one has to anticipate this and be able to react in the best possible manner. And of course, downstream, what are the jobs that can be created? What are the industries that can become sustainable thanks to this? So this is basically what we tried to do. And if I want to sum it up, it's unfair to the study because I'm going straight into the details and skipping everything that relates to the policies and what do we do. But we have, if we want to make it very simple, 4 possible scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
The first one would be that Lebanon would find a minimal amount of gas, which is slightly higher than 30 billion cubic meters. Less than that, there is no interest in exploiting. It becomes
too costly.
Exactly. In this situation, we would simply have about 6 to 7 years of self-sufficiency in terms of gas. The revenue will not be great and during those 6-7 years. And the reasonable thing to do would be to use this money to precisely give Lebanon the infrastructure that would keep it as a gas importer under the best conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Another scenario, which is slightly better, is, for instance, that Lebanon finds 100 billion cubic meters. In this situation, we would have the possibility of extracting gas from 2025. Our assumption is that it starts in 2025 until 2054. But the self-sufficiency would be until 2042 only. And here, Lebanon would be able to export between 2 to 3 billion cubic meters for most of that period, between 2025 and 2040.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the price of natural gas on the market, by a simple multiplier, we can imagine how much money this would be. This is okay, this is not bad, but this is not plenty. So for those who are already claiming that Lebanon doesn't need an IMF program, we don't need reforms, we have the gas, it's perfect. No, it's not. Gas will not be a game changer. I'm going to skip the third scenario because once again, it's if we find 250 cubic meters,
mm-hmm.
but let me go to the best case scenario, which is that Lebanon all of a sudden discovers immediately 500 billion cubic meters. Does this make us a gas paradise? No, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
This means that, yes, we found 500, we will exploit for over 50 years, we will become a regional player and a good one, not a small one. From 2025 to 2074, we will be able to extract. We will be self-sufficient probably until the 2060s. And we will be able also to reach a peak of, let me say, about 14 billion cubic meters in the best year possible, an average of 12.5 over the years where the plateau of extraction is.
Mhm.
This means that Lebanon will have great amount of money coming in, provided that we are very lucky to be in the best case scenario, provided that we have a good governance to manage all of this, because at the end, if we want companies, if we want good infrastructure, all of this is very much dependent on a good governance, which we don't have for the time being. But let's assume that all of this is in place. This is the equivalent of what? $1.5 billion a year. If you want to dream big time, $2 billion a year. This, of course, is very sizable, but this is not enough to cater for the problems of Lebanon. To give you an idea, the Central Bank of Lebanon is hiding, now it's known, nearly $90 billion in its accounts of losses. This is huge, and it is not an inflow of 1.5 billion on a yearly basis that's going to deal with that kind of things. And of course, the money is not meant to compensate for the losses.
Sure.
What I'm trying to say is that, yes, it is a big inflow of money, just like having, I don't know, donors' money that is still there over 50 years and sizable one, but it is not the game changer that people imagine. It's not a jump between Qatar in 1950 and Qatar in 2020. It's not the case, and it will not be the case. So the other purpose of this study was precisely to scientifically explain that, please, people, don't accept the idea that we can have the worst governance in the world, that we can continue to go down the drain, that nothing needs to happen, and the gas will sort it out. Because under any scenario, this is not true.
And as you said, those are all scenarios based on an assumption that the reforms have passed and that you have an enabling environment for gas exploration and exploitation in the first place. So now that this deal will be inked in a few days' time, there are many steps to be taken, basically on the part of the Lebanese government. And of course, there are political challenges there with regards to the presidency and the formation of the government and the reforms that you mentioned that have been in discussion for years. What would be the most important immediate step after this deal is inked? What would you advise that next step be?
Let me first say that I don't agree with some voices that we've been hearing in Lebanon that keep saying that the gas adventure starts now. I mean, at the end, this maritime borderline deal is about one block. Lebanon has 10 blocks. The natural question is, why didn't we start with another block in the meantime? Why didn't we prepare anything regarding the petroleum adventure in the meantime? Where is the National Oil Company if we need one? Where is the Sovereign Wealth Fund? Everybody says we need one within Lebanon. Which structure, which governance is going to be in charge of managing the revenue? Do we know how to avoid the catastrophic Dutch disease that we might face if all of a sudden, and we know our people, they start spending the money inside just to buy more votes or just to make more money out of doubtful public markets? So that's one thing. Second, what is very important about this deal is not only about the possibility of having gas. There are many things here. First, it's about the possibility of achieving something through negotiations between entities that are at odds, that don't talk to each other, and that's a premiere. And what is interesting is that in Lebanon, we've seen a very wide support for the deal, at least within the parties that are in power. And this is not, we're not used to that in the country. So for once, there has been some kind of a broad understanding on a topic that can, that could have been extremely difficult to achieve. The second thing that is interesting in this deal is that let's imagine that these dynamics would have continued and we couldn't have reached a deal. We would have probably reached a point where the hot confrontation would have become unavoidable. That's a second very important thing. And the third one is that now there is no, how would I say, no good reason for the political elite to continue to postpone what it should have done for a very long time. And here we come to the gas per se.
Mm-hmm.
So what is needed to properly address the gas situation? Of course, we need to continue the story of the maritime borders in the north, also with Syria. And we saw the aborted attempt a couple of days. And we need to talk to Cyprus. But what is also badly needed is a clear policy. What do we want to do with that? Do we know what would be optimal, whether we want to produce gas and sell it all, whether we want to switch all of our electricity to gas and then use most of it internally? Do we want to produce electricity and sell it to the neighbors?
Mm-hmm.
And so on. Number two, what kind of institutions are going to manage that? Do we really want to see money going to the central bank before the restructuring of the central bank? Not clear. Do we want to have a sovereign wealth fund under whose authority? And then what kind of partnership do we have with the external world for sales and for transportation? Are we part of the gas line, the pipelines, how do we call them, the gazoducs, to in the region? Can we be part of them, given our relationship or the absence of relationship with the southern neighbor, knowing that everybody in the region has already signed agreements right, left, and center, and Lebanon is left totally on the side? Do we want to have our own, and do we know how costly this can be? The study, of course, has given the figures for each and every scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this, those are extremely important questions that need to be addressed very quickly, because at the end, the purpose is not to extract gas. The purpose is to make the best of it within the economy and to make sure that the proceeds are good for the capital markets, are good for the labor market, and are not here to further increase the inequalities that have already destroyed Lebanon.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no clarity at this point as to what the direction of the political leaders are going to take in this regard. And so there haven't been similar studies, for example, that have looked at those various policy options or set just simple objectives as to where to go next and what Lebanon wants to do with this gas once this process begins. And that leads me, because you did mention also Lebanon's relationship with the external world, with potential buyers, with the market, but also with governments.
Mhm.
And we know that there are needs in Europe given the war in Ukraine. Um, and so there are pressures, perhaps, that many countries in Europe are feeling, but also pressures in the region, given that many of the neighboring countries are also dependent on energy imports. And so, what do you expect from some of these international powers, but particularly the United States? What could the United States do beyond brokering this deal, which is an important step forward and a diplomatic boon for this current administration? What else can the United States do to help Lebanon steer the ship in a direction that would maximize the economic benefits for the country and its people?
Well, as you just said, this deal in itself is a very big thing. It's already for a lot of people an unexpected success, and I would say that it is extremely timely too, not only because of the situation in Europe, but also because of the dynamics in the Middle East and what is going on uh, between various countries, but also inside various countries. And for instance, looking at Israeli internal politics and what was happening around this deal is extremely interesting in itself. But the question in Lebanon remains always the same. Who is the interlocutor to do what? You have a system of power that doesn't allow the various clans that have taken over to reach agreements at the optimal level. Usually it's always the smallest common denominator. And this always takes you to the wrong decisions or to the least efficient ones. So one thing to be quickly, we need to deal with that is who is the proper interlocutor. Until now, it has always been difficult, but the foreign parties would find their own interlocutors internally. Sometimes, if you have a strong guy, he would be the interlocutor of many. And sometimes you would have each country having its own. And of course, it would add to the division of Lebanon. But in order not to go a lot into those details, maybe on the gas story only, there is still something that needs to be brokered around where do we sell and how do we transport. It's not only the issue of Lebanon, far from that. The wars in the Mediterranean recently had a lot to do with petroleum. I mean, the Libyan war in itself, can you imagine Turkey being present in Libya, Russia being present in Libya, and so on? It was mostly about how the gas in the Mediterranean are going to be divided. And on this, there is a great deal of work that needs to be done. And I believe that only the United States has the power to do that. And that would mean to try to find first the proper allocation for each and every gas owner, if I may. Second, to facilitate the sales contract between the various players. And third, to broker another deal on the lines for transportation. Each one of those is a very complicated one. Without a global deal in the area, as usual, the most powerful are going to get the best deal, and the others run the risk of being left on the side. Otherwise, we could have a region where distribution is fair and where everybody benefits from common infrastructure. Of course, while neutralizing all of the political difficulties, but we just proved that we could do that.
Thank you very much, Alain. This has been a very enriching discussion, very educational. We look forward to more publications from the Lebanon Citizen Foundation and to continuing the discussion on this topic and on all things Lebanon as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Marisa. It was a pleasure for me. Just to give you heads on, we are going to publish sometime soon a study on migration. And that's, I mean, you will see. And we also have a study on rising inequalities and taxation that is in the pipes. So hopefully at some point in time, there will be the governance that will be able to put those issues into the public debate. Thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure.